to it. What's it like being in the minority in such a divisive DC right now?
Well, I have nothing to compare it to. So to me, it's normal. You know, I didn't go up to DC with some sort of idealistic notion that I'm going to like solve some big problems right away. And it's going to be this just, I don't know. I think people have a kind of utopian vision of what it is to go to Congress, and people don't realize that by design it is meant for gridlock. And we should often be grateful for that, because there's a lot of people up there that have a lot of incentives to take a lot of drastic action very quickly that may not be all that well thought out. You know, these are complex issues we're dealing with. Some might argue that Congress is dealing with too much and has been for a very, very long time. And we don't necessarily have the staffs to do it. This gets into an interesting, deeper conversation about the nature of Congress. But. Yeah. So is it divisive? Yes. Is that any different than it's been in the past? Maybe. I don't really know. I'm sure it's really nice being the majority. I think we've got a really good shot of taking the majority. I mean, we only need 4 seats. Or well, they have a 4-flip margin. So I mean, you could almost take back the majority in Texas alone.
Yes.
You know.
You get 2 more seats or 3 more seats, you think?
In Texas, everybody says 3.
Okay.
You know, I don't know how that's going to look, but you know, at least maybe 2 out of 3 of those seats could be Republican. We might even flip a couple. I mean, these South Texas districts are getting real problematic for the Democrats.
Sure.
You know, you got Henry Cuellar out there sounding like a Republican. He is a co-sponsor with me on a gun bill. Like, I love it. Like, Henry's a truly bipartisan. A lot of Democrats like claim they're to be moderates. They're just, I've never seen a single moderate thing out of them.
Sure.
Cuellar's different.
Okay, okay. So you talked about Democrats maybe going overboard on some of these things. One of the clips that went viral back in probably December was Nancy Pelosi. She put forward this massive bill. Mm-hmm. The massive bill, you were calling for her to break these up into individual bills so you could vote individually, because there were maybe some good things in those bills. And you had this Crenshaw torches Pelosi clip that went viral.
And we all know it. Study after study shows outdoor dining is safe, that outbreaks are not occurring because of our small businesses, our gyms, our restaurants, our salons. And yet these small businesses are in the crosshairs of cowardly politicians across the country. This madness has to stop.
Talking about kind of your floor speech and kind of your frustration with those sorts of activities.
Yeah, well, floor speeches are a great way for us to just get our thoughts out on the House floor. What people should know this. I like to give some people some insights on like what it's really like being in Congress. What's funny about moments like this is there's nobody there. Like we do these speeches all day long to no one, but obviously we know it's on C-SPAN and then we can clip it and use it.
Is Nancy even there? Is the speaker even there?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Sometimes she might be. There's moments where some of these speeches, you have a lot more people there, but that's actually somewhat rare. You know, you basically sign up for time to do a 5-minute. I just think that's a funny thing to tell people. And I was expressing my frustration that, look, I get how oftentimes you end up just packing a bunch of your stuff into a bill. A lot of people say, oh, just vote on each issue separately. That's not really realistic. It would be impossible to schedule that.
Sure. I
think because you have to have 2 hours of debate per bill. It has to go through committee. There's the process itself, and you don't really want to mess with that process too much, because then it wouldn't be very democratic and it wouldn't be very fair. So a lot of people think, well, just if you guys agree on 5%, just pass that. Yes, that's true, but that does have to still need to be negotiated outside of it. So just for some perspective. But on COVID relief, where you really do need to put politics aside, and there's really obvious things that we agree on, just put it on the floor.
Sure.
Just put it on the floor. And she just wasn't getting political backlash for that, and I think people sensed that, and that's probably why that particular clip did so well.
Cool. So I want to have a little bit of fun with you. A little segment I like to call Crenshaw Conspiracies. So, you know, I will forever be linked to you some way, because every time you do something that people don't like, I get a text message, and I appreciate that.
I know you'll yell at me.
Yeah, and you know I'm your friend because I don't forward those text messages to you in the middle of the night. Yeah. So we've got to dispel a few things here. Okay, first thing is the COVID lockdowns. In your opinion, scientific, unscientific, other? What are your thoughts on those?
Unscientific.
Okay.
Yeah, not based in data. I don't know. Is that my conspiracy or is that somebody else? I don't know. What it's
well, I mean, it's you on a conspiracy.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. I mean, I don't. I've been very consistent against lockdowns since the beginning, even when it was a little riskier to be against lockdowns. And I've been proven right over time, because like my sense in the beginning was, you can't control this to the extent that you think you can.
Sure.
It's a pandemic. Nature does what nature does. And it's not obvious to me that closing businesses, which are well regulated, you can kind of manage inflows and outflows to an extent, is somehow stopping people from interacting with one another. Mm-hmm. And we were just, and now in hindsight, I've clearly proven right. There's study after study, one of the most recent from Stanford, shows there's no correlation between shelter-in-place orders, lockdowns of businesses, and the spread of the pandemic. And country-to-country comparisons show that, state-to-state comparisons show that. So a lot of cost, no benefit.
Sure.
So it's generally a bad policy.
Probably the biggest cost, I would say, with you got the kiddos that are in school.
Yeah.
They're put at a 6-month competitive disadvantage to the rest of the world, so they've got to catch up somehow. 6 months is a lot of time to make up.
That one's even more unscientific. You know, you can argue about keeping vulnerable adults locked down in their houses. You really can't argue about the kids. Under 20 years old, I believe, you have a higher chance of dying from the flu than you do COVID. So
But there was no flu this year, right? There's like zero flu this year.
Yeah, that was interesting too. And so, you know, there needs to be an honest assessment of our activity, of our policies over the last couple of years for the world. I mean, and look, the U.S., even in some of the most lockdown areas in the U.S., it's still a lot more open than a lot of places around the world. I know that sounds crazy, but like, I've a lot of international friends. You look at Europe, you look at a lot of South American countries too. Israel, they lock down really, really hard. I mean, to a crazy extent. And what did they get for it? You know, nothing.
Sure. Probably the next conspiracy that I hear the most, and this is, I think Lacey will put up the most common image that I receive on my text messages, is this image of you linked to Alexander Soros, which is apparently some relation to George Soros, and the text is always some derivative of Dan's funded by Soros. Yeah. He's a Manchurian candidate type of figure, and so what's going on with it? I couldn't even find this image on their website. I couldn't even find your name on their website.
This one's good to. I told them to take it off because I was sick of getting this stupid message from people.
Well, you're welcome.
Look, I want to address a deeper problem with our side, on the conservative base. We're paranoid as hell, and it needs to stop. We need to be able to evaluate information in front of us better and critically think better. Okay, this is how QAnon happens. This is how 9/11 conspiracies happen. Oh, there was no planes. It's like, yes, there was. Yes, there was. And it's really concerning that every 9/11 anniversary, I can find thousands and thousands of likes and shares for 9/11 conspiracies. And it's not liberals doing that. It's people who tend to vote if they vote at all. We need to admit that there's a problem. So like this notion that like there's some like secret cabal of globalists, and by the way, all the people saying global, like you don't even know how to define globalists. Like what does that even mean? Does it mean like you want some like one government order in the world? And if that's what it is, like if that's how you're defining it, then how the hell do you think I'm the one proposing that? You know, just think, just like stop and think and be an adult. Like, so I'm being very forceful here, right? Like, and I will say this to anybody who accuses me of this nonsense. Like the young global, and so what is this actually, once you start looking through this thing, World Economic Forum, I've never really researched it that much, but it amounts to nothing, right? It's that they list together a bunch of people that are kind of influencers on the global stage, which, okay, great. There's no meetings here. Like, I do talk to Tulsi a lot. Tulsi's a friend.
Yeah, she's pretty cool. She's pretty cool.
She is cool. We disagree on almost everything, but we agree on a lot of fundamentals. You know, she's a true liberal. There's a lot of, you can have a lot in common with true liberals. We got Zuckerberg. That's interesting. He's going to be in a hearing tomorrow morning.
Really?
In front of me, yeah. So
you guys are really close, right? You and Mark.
We're going to talk big tech. Well, I've never spoken to him or met him.
But you're supposed to be best friends with all these people.
I am. Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, and Megan Rapinoe. Jeez, this is. You know, I mean, it's so silly and annoying. It's like, yeah. But I see this one on the internet a lot. Okay. And I'm just like, what do you think? What do you think is happening here? Is what I want to ask people who are like saying this, and like, you know, think through it a little bit. It's funny too. Like I'll be at a lot of events, and somebody will come up to me and they'll be really nice and excited to meet me, and be like, "Oh man, and I give you so much hell online," and I'm like, "Why? Like, you're obviously a fan, so like, why are you saying toxic things online?"
Yeah.
And like, this is serious for me because it builds on itself, and people who don't have the ability, again, to evaluate information in front of them, they feed on this. And it makes my job really, really difficult. And like, you know, excuse my language, but like, you're an adult. Why are you being a shit talker online? You know, just stop. Yeah. Just stop. And we could do so much better with, because look, my number one goal is persuading moderates, right, to vote for us. That's how I define fighting. A lot of people define fighting as performing for the base. We have a lot of members of Congress who like to perform.
Yeah. You love the word fighting, by the way.
Yeah.
You love the word fighting.
And I know what it means, really. And it means winning. And to win in politics, you gotta persuade people. And when we dive down into these little conspiracy wormholes, we seem crazy. And it's really easy for the left to build these caricatures of conservatives and apply it broadly to everybody. And it's toxic. It's toxic, and it's so damn silly. Look, we're always looking for somebody who betrayed us, it seems like. That's the number one thing. I call them rhino hunters, right? Everybody gets their rhino gun out, and they go, and they're going to get them rhinos.
Yeah.
I'm like, shut up.
Yeah.
Just stop.
Yeah.
Don't just stop it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm pretty hard on these people who come up with this. I make fun of them a lot because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so... Yeah. And I have a lot of opinions on it, as you can tell.
If you could be a little more clear next time, I'd appreciate that, Dan. Yeah. And I think we probably did 20 or 25 forums or debates together over a few month period. So I think everything I've heard from you, I've heard a lot from you in person. Like, there's no rhino type of belief in your bone in your body. Yeah.
Our primary, by the way, was interesting. Like, we didn't have anybody who was running in that section of the right. Nobody. Like, you know. Justin Lurie once talked about like abolishing the Department of Education or something. You know, it was a little bit out there, but frankly, it's not the craziest idea. Yeah. It's just unrealistic. But you know, but we didn't have anybody who was running in that like Marjorie Taylor Greene space.
Yes.
It was an extremely reasonable primary, which is odd for modern primaries. And it shouldn't be. I wish it wasn't. Hey, it says something about our district, I guess.
That's right. That's right. So the number 2 conspiracy that I get text messages about, and these are like multi-page text messages, is your stance on red flag laws.
Yeah,
and I'll kind of roll this into the Texas GOP's priority this year and it's their kind of their annual priority of constitutional carry. Mm-hmm. And so you would kind of give us a quick overview of your view on gun rights, red flag laws, and that sort of thing, and maybe a little bit on this bill with Cuellar as well. I imagine that probably ties into it a little bit.
Okay, I'm on the constitutional carry bill. I'm on it every year at the federal level. I believe in it. But and on the Cuellar's, so I'll answer the easy questions first. On the Cuellar bill, that one basically requires that if that ATF has to establish some kind of appeals process for their rules, because your only way to deal with the ATF right now when they create regulations is to sue them, And you know, we were very successful a few months ago. I basically made this go viral where I said, I published how to comment on an ATF rulemaking for pistol braces. And then we got so many people to do it that they withdrew the rule completely. So my record on the Second Amendment is much better than most. Because I actually, again, this goes back to actually doing things versus signaling to people that you're a patriot.
Yeah.
Shut up. Like, just stop. Like, I call it patriot LARPing. Yeah. Familiar with LARPing? Live action role playing.
Okay.
So the people who like get up in their medieval swords and they do live action role playing, like some of the elves, some of the trolls, right? And they go to the big fields and do, this is a big thing throughout. Okay. It's always has been. So I call it patriot LARPing. Like when you go to buy this cool kit online, you've never worn it overseas, you don't really know how to shoot that AR. You certainly don't know what attack reload is. You don't know what a transition drill is, but hey, you're a patriot. Stop.
Yeah.
Like I'm not, you know, like, so I'm not gonna take criticism from you.
Yes.
And the other problem is they tend to, you know, like to exercise their rights and basically go scare suburban moms and dads, and because they're like, who are these guys?
Yeah, yeah.
And they're like, we're fighting for the Second Amendment. You're not fighting. You're patriot LARPing. It's different, okay? So anyway, I have very strong opinions on this. There's a doing something and there's not. And I noticed too, when in HR 8, that was the universal background checks bill that just passed the House, and yeah, some Republicans did vote for it, but I've never voted for it. And I did a whole lengthy video explaining, because this is complicated for people, yes, like why this isn't good policy. And then I noted, I'm like, where's the NRA's video? Where's Gun Owners of America on this? Find me a single Second Amendment advocacy group with millions and millions of dollars in the bank that does one educational video to persuade a single person to see it your way. You can't find one.
Wow.
These people are useless, and I am calling them out. I am sick of it, and I will never be criticized for any of my stances on the Second Amendment. So like, I'm done with it. Okay, now the red flag laws thing. That day, this is following the shooting in El Paso, and this is the sequence of events. President Trump comes out and says, we're for red flag laws at the federal level. Everybody likes to forget that one, right? Yeah. Because he's Teflon, he can't say anything wrong. You know, people are like, well, I'm sure he didn't mean it, he was playing 15,000 D chest. Yeah, whatever. And so I tweet out, I'm like, look, you can consider these at the state level, and then I move on to, and then I do a series of videos basically like this. These are the parameters to protect due process, because there are no red flag laws that I could possibly support. None of them protect due process. If you're going to have that conversation, this is how you do it. I gave the public way too much credit on this one, because I thought that we could have a real like nuanced. I could like kind of deliver some information to people, and I was totally wrong. I was totally wrong, and I'll never make that mistake again. He's like, I was like, look, I don't, there's not a single red flag law I support. Yes, you do, you voted for it. I'm like, that's not even a vote, like, first of all. You sponsored a bill. No, I didn't, like, people just, and then that just rolls into this conspiracy like you're talking about. And stop, my message to people, stop, again, this goes back to evaluate information in front of you, stop thinking with your reptile brain. Think with your adult brain.
Yes.
It is killing our politics. I'm the best messenger you've got for the Second Amendment, and you neutered me on it. Can't talk about it because you guys stopped it with your nonsense, with your childish nonsense on this issue. Just stop. And so, yeah, it's been a lie for a long time. It died down a long time ago, but that's the explanation.
Okay, so that was the fun. That was the fun portion of the interview. Yeah. So I'm glad you enjoyed that.
You got me going. I get riled up on conspiracies, man, because like it's the hardest part about this job. It's not dealing with the left. It's dealing with our own side.
Yeah.
And because I want our side to be better, and it demoralizes me when we go down these weird rabbit holes. Yeah. And it happens. Look, for all the texts you get, I get all of them too, but I get a lot more than that. Not necessarily about me, but just issues in general. Sure. And they're like, is it true that this is, I'm like, no, it's not. And you should know better.
Yeah.
Like you gotta just pull it back. pull it back. Like, you know, it just, we have to do better. That's why I try to deliver so much content that is designed to educate on a lot of different subjects, because I want you to be able to make the right arguments and don't go down a track that turns you into a caricature that the left wants to build.
Yes, yes, certainly, certainly. Well, now something even more important than gun laws is your favorite show. So in your book, you revealed that your favorite show was Saved by the Bell.
Okay.
Is that true, or is that false? I mean,
I didn't say it was my favorite. I said I was a fan when I was at that age. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like you're judging.
No. So the important thing that all of America wants to know, this is a rank order question, my friend. Rank order my question. Jesse Spano, Kelly Kapowski, Lisa Turtle.
That's Kelly. I mean, it's not even a question.
Kelly Kapowski.
It's Kelly Kapowski got us through a lot of hard times as children. Yeah.
It's got to be. Tiffany Amber.
Yep. It's Kelly Kapowski. Yeah. It's not even close.
Well, good. You mentioned Trump being Teflon a second ago. What do you think Trump's role will be in the Republican Party, especially the upcoming primaries specifically? Does he have vengeance on his brain? I think he still has maybe $200 million or so. He raised $230 million after he lost.
I know, it was ridiculous. Look, the real answer is who knows. I don't think he knows, to be honest. That's my assessment of that. But look, it does seem obvious that he wants to play at least a light role as a kingmaker and endorse people. I think his first goal is to attack the 10 people who voted for impeachment. But I'll be honest with you, I don't see that. I don't think that he certainly doesn't win all of those. He might knock off a couple, but the conversation about all that has really moved on. And you know, so I don't know. If I were to give him advice, I would say, look, you live on Mar-a-Lago. You're still a billionaire. Life's not bad. You had a lot of accomplishments in 4 years that you can build a legacy off of. The last few months haven't been great for that legacy, but if your message is constantly reminding people of some of the good things and running the race, basically running the messaging race that you should have been running throughout 2020, and because you would be president right now, then your legacy will survive, and that to me that would be like the ultimate goal. But I've never been able to get inside of his head, so you know I don't know, and frankly I don't think he's decided yet.
Sure.
He could be a lot more in the public eye right now if he wanted to, but he's made a deliberate choice not to. Just kind of speaks with some statements every once in a while. Might do an interview occasionally, but more outspoken on the border stuff recently, because that's a good bailiwick for him, right? That's a good issue for him. So you know, why not? Why wouldn't you go in on it? And he can make such a clear distinction, just kind of stick it to Biden a little bit, and he should. I mean, because this administration, Biden administration, they've made quite the habit of blaming literally every problem on the Trump administration. Oh, there was no vaccine plan. Like, it's self-evident that that's not true.
We're gonna do 1 million vaccines a day.
Yeah, on the day he took office. Yeah, and so, you know, that border stuff was a mess that we took over. It's just not. That's not true. You know, these things are just not true. And we could go into plenty of detail as to why. But, you know, it's you know, and I'm sure this is kind of one of the funniest like memes I saw was Jen Psaki. Well, the Trump administration left us really slippery stairs, and that's why Biden fell on them. Like, that was actually pretty funny. I'm not a fan of making fun of Biden just for slipping on stairs. I think it was a little overdone, but you know, but that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So you sort of danced around the topic of the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. We've talked about a little about the COVID conspiracy to shut everything down. We got the border issue at hand.
Yeah.
Where do you see the Great Reset right now, and then where's it going over the next four to 6 years?
I don't know if I danced around it. I just don't know anything about it.
There are a lot of subjects that touch the Great Reset, or at least the philosophy of the Great Reset.
Yeah, I just don't know much about it.
Okay.
Like, and I don't care either. You know, I think we're obsessing over it on the right a little bit. And look, I have been to the website and I saw, okay, this is why people are saying that, because I did look into that. Okay, they say something about a Great Reset. I don't look into it any more than that. Look, it's a bunch of people. It's an organization that has no real power. I mean, yeah, look, there's always going to be people that maybe. I think what they mean by Great Reset is the same thing the Democrats are always saying about what kind of infrastructure they want to invest in, redistribution of wealth, that kind of thing, more open immigration. I mean, it's what you think it is, I believe. Yeah. But I think when you call it the Great Reset, it sort of indicates that there's like a secret, power cabal under it all. Yeah. And it's not so secret. It's just the Democrat Party. So, like, again, I just want us to like take a step back. Like, it's not a conspiracy. It is a political platform. Sure. But we sound a little crazy when we start talking about like some sort of like secret cabal. Just fight the Democrats. It's the same thing. It's all the same thing.
Sure. And you mentioned wealth distribution. I think probably be nice to take a quick tangent into that, because that seems to be the core of their economic control, or at least their economic plan. They being the liberals, and they not being the cabal.
Yeah. It's all the same, I guess. It's just more open, right? Like, it's not some secret thing.
So do they not read economics? I mean, do they not look at things like Proto-Principle, Price's Law, where it's always a fact that the square root of the number is going to have 50% of the production. Square root of 100, 10 of them will have. Square root of 1,000,000, 1,000 will have 50% of the resources. And it's even more disparate than that. Do they not realize that all the wealth is eventually going to reaccrue to the exact same people?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question, whether they're ignorant of the facts or whether they're lying. And it's usually maybe a combination of both. They have a you have to move back into the psychology of how a leftist thinks. And they believe fundamentally that you can control society and human nature far more than, say, I would believe. So that's a dispositional difference. And everything flows from that. So that's important to understand. So they have different values associated with that. They believe that wealth is ill-begotten, right? So I might believe that somebody deserves the wealth that they've created. They don't, right? They see it and they think, like, well, Bernie Sanders says this all the time. He notes how much more billions have been made by billionaires during the pandemic. And that's the only question he asks. If they've made more money, it must be immoral. Yeah. Now, I don't think that way. I think, well, how did they make them? Did they steal the money? Now, if they stole the money, or if they took advantage of people, if they infringed on somebody's rights to make that money, that would be immoral, as far as my moral framework is concerned. The left doesn't have the same moral framework. Yeah. This is really important to understand. It's the only way we can understand like why we have these differences. And also, these are eternal differences. These dispositional differences have been, there's a good book written about this called The Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell. And he really talks about how long these divisions have been occurring in human history. It'll never go away. Now, in modern form, we call it the left and the right, but he calls it the constrained and the unconstrained vision. And I think it's a highly accurate way of speaking it. So that's a bit philosophical, but that's why, I think. They think wealth is immoral, and they don't really believe in hierarchies, especially hierarchies formatted around some kind of meritocracy. That's a really important thing too. And they'll say this. There's literature in progressive woke left that talks about meritocracies being racist and neutral applications being racist. I mean,
that's the basis of critical race theory. It started all this back in the 1960s.
Yeah, you have to view it through a race lens or a gender lens or whatever kind of other intersectional lens. And this means it's really hard to find a truth, like a core of truth. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. There's a lot of contradictions in it, and it's hard to follow. And that's kind of the point. They want to confuse you.
Yeah. Well, you wrote an article in the Daily Wire, I think it was last week, that talked a little bit about the victors versus victims mentality, how storytelling has been used by the left in order to create false narratives that lead to to bills and objectives that they're trying to fulfill that they're not logically coherent with that. You mentioned Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell says that the Democrats, the difference between the Democrats and Republicans is the Democrats, and I don't mean this as a slight in any way, but the Democrats will send their A team into politics and their B team into business. The Republicans send their B team into politics and their A team into the free marketplace. And it seems to me like they have, present company excluded, they have superior communicators, and that communication, although it's illogical in its basis, it is more effective in its communication of their narrative, because they want to be the determinants of the hierarchy.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true, although I don't know if they have better communicators, because I strain to see like an opponent on the other side that I really respect as a communicator that can go toe-to-toe with me. I actually don't.
I agree, 100%, yeah.
At least in politics, maybe in like Bill Maher is actually pretty good.
But you destroyed him pretty clearly, though.
Well, but he chose a bad debate. You know, I'm sure we could do better anyway. But there's some that might be better. But they've got to be very moderate.
Sure.
If they're gonna, because if the further left they go, the easier it is to bash them. Anyway, but what they have an advantage on is the ability to leverage emotion to their side and empathy, right? They're always the party of compassion and sympathy and empathy and feelings, and you know, the public is too. Sure. And also they're the party of, we'll give you stuff if you vote for me. Right? And that's pretty compelling. And again, I'm really mad at our side lately because everybody's like, why didn't Mitch McConnell support the $2,000 checks? That's why we lost Georgia. I was like, what? Guys, I thought we were conservatives. I thought we were, didn't believe in just dishing out money to somebody who doesn't need it. When it comes to direct cash payments, well over 100 million people who were getting those and never lost their job. A lot of those are government workers, by the way, active duty military, thousands, these are, for a family, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, is this ethical? Is this, guy, like, come on. Yeah. It's very frustrating how we've given into that. That's populism, by the way. So populism, I think, rears its head on the left in almost every policy. And I define populism as telling you what you want to hear as opposed to what you should hear and the truth. I think that's the best explanation of populism that I've come up with, because everybody just says it, and I'm like, what does it mean? Yes. I think that's what it means. We're going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to connect with you emotionally, and I want to make you feel good. I want to make you, whatever. Oh, you believe in that weird conspiracy? It's good. That's fine. It's fine. It's you. It's your truth. Okay. And we've started to do that instead of saying no. Like there's a box here.
Yeah.
Like there is no QAnon. There's just not. Like, stop it. Now, the right is better about that than the left, but we've gotten shaky on this, and we need to just be like, no, there's an Overton window here, and outside of it, you're not with us. And we've gotten into this weird notion. Like Marjorie is a good example of this. There's no reason to defend her. She offers us nothing. She doesn't know a whole lot. She has engaged in crazy conspiracies. She's proven that she has even if she apologizes for it now, she's proven that she has an inability to evaluate information put in front of her. There's no reason to defend this person. She's always going out and performing for the base. Why do we reward these things? And just because they're unapologetic, well, they're fighting for us. No, they're not. They're performing for you. There's a difference. And so we need to be careful about that, not engage in populism. It doesn't help anybody. It's not just, some people confuse populism with just the things that people want that are good. Well, that's not so, like working for the people. It's not what populism is, and that's not what these policies that were being promoted are either. It's a bit of a tangent. I'm not even sure what the initial question was.
So your book, Fortitude, hit the New York Times bestsellers list, widely rave reviews. What was kind of your business decision on whether to write that book or not? What was the process? Did you come up with the concept and pitch it, or did someone else pitch it to you? How did that work?
Yeah, well, one of my good buddies, the same guy who convinced me to run for Congress, was like, "Hey, you should write a book too." I was like, "Yeah, and you have gotten me to do more work than than anybody I know." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe that's a good idea." And he's like, "Why don't you just have breakfast with an agent?" And this was, by the way, this conversation was happening right after I was elected. So before I took office, right after I was elected. And so I was like, all right, I'll have breakfast with an agent.
So this was after SNL?
Yeah,
Okay,
just after
right.
SNL. So that's why it made sense, right?
Yeah.
Because there's sort of 15 minutes of fame from that. And, why not pitch a book? It's a good time to do it. And, and so the idea for the book sort of came from that conversation. Because I honestly was like, I don't know what to write about. And he's like, well, and I'm like, I'm not going to write a SEAL book. Because I just think it's overdone, and I don't want that to be my legacy, and so we sort of just chatted through it and came up with this. And once we had the concept, then I could easily write the outline.
Yes.
Right? I was like, okay, because I love the idea of these sort of self-help books, because I want to deliver you a lesson. I don't want to tell you a story. I'm not a great storyteller. And I don't want to tell you my story. It just didn't seem like the right thing to do. But my story can be woven within it anyway. I want you to learn something. And that's pretty consistent with all the content I try to deliver. I want to give you something. If I give a speech, I don't like rally speeches. I'm not good at them. I guess I could be, but I don't like doing it. It feels cheap to me. And I want you to come away with something after I give a talk or even post something. I want you to be like, I didn't know that before, or that's a take that I can use and that's beneficial. And again, beneficial to further our cause a little bit. And for Fortitude, it's more personal. It's not really a political book, although it is a culture war book, so that certainly drives politics to a great extent. But I definitely believe liberals could easily read the book and think it's fair, and a lot have told me that. So, it was designed that way. It's more self-help than it is political, if it's political at all.
Yeah, it was very religious. In fact, it was for Baptist deacon. It was overtly religious, surprisingly religious. I think I read it in the first month that it was out, and I texted you, said, "Hey Dan, great job, fantastic book." The religious. Surprised me. I think you even said in your book that you don't wear your religion on your sleeve.
Yeah, and you know that. I've never have.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Finish.
Yeah. So I sent that text to you, and you replied. I don't know if you remember this reply. You said, "Yeah, I'd like to get into some churches around the district."
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, because we'd been to a number of churches together. I was thinking to myself, well, man, this guy's dropping the F-bomb, but he's also talking about the cross of Christ in this book. I'm pretty sure that you're not going to get any churches. That's kind of my thinking there. I kind of laughed there. And then not 3 days later, I get a text from my own pastor. One of the pastors at my church said, "Rick, just finished Crenshaw's book. He was amazing. It was great. His theology was really sound in there. I'm just really, really impressed." And I thought, you know what? I'm an idiot. I just didn't see it coming. So
I won't drop F-bombs when I speak in the churches. I promise you that.
No.
Okay.
Well, you should. You'd be great.
Yeah, I don't think people would care. Look, it's but of course, when we were having that conversation, I think COVID was in full swing, so getting into churches wasn't in the cards. Things have changed in 2021, so I've never done a book tour.
Yeah,
I'd love to, and churches really are the ideal place for it because, So I weave in religion too, and if I were to write it again, if I had more time, look, I had a deadline. It's 1 year long. There's so much in the Bible. Again, I'm not a theologian by any stretch, but I keep learning more and more, and I'm like, that really applies to this and that, and that's that. So, and a point that I make often is, look, truth. This actually gets back to the Thomas Sowell book, The Conflict of Visions, and the difference between the constrained and the unconstrained. The constrained vision, which is the sort of conservative vision, and it's constrained because there's a constraint on how much government can affect society. That's the notion behind constrained, okay? Unconstrained means there's like no limit, right? We can just keep tinkering with you. We will change your human nature. We have unconstrained power to do so. So just for the audience, that's what I mean by that. And part of the constrained vision is this idea that truth comes over millennia, trials and errors, and religion is like that. Okay, you know, mankind has received that truth, and we've figured out how to talk about it and to live it over time. That's why the moral framework of the Judeo-Christian history and the framework is so important and so true.
Yes.
It's true. And it's really important to have that anchor. And that separates us as social conservatives quite a bit from progressives, which by definition has no fundamental truth. And they'd be proud to say that. They'd say, no, we need to keep changing it. So that's one of the reasons why I put so much in there. I used a lot of philosophy too, like Stoic philosophy fit well within the fortitude mindset. But that's why it's just, look, you've got to, don't reinvent the wheel. I'm not teaching you any new lessons in fortitude. I'm sort of repackaging them and adding some of my own personal flair. And that was what was fun about it. Like I have a concept I'm trying to deliver to you, and within the couple of pages to support that concept, I'm giving you a pop culture reference, maybe about Taylor Swift or something. I'm giving you a biblical verse. I'm giving you some history. Yes. I'm giving you a policy example, and I'm giving you a SEAL story. And that's what makes it fun and readable, I think. And it was fun to write because of that too. It's just very multidisciplinary. Yeah,
you used a lot of John Paul II quotes as well throughout, and probably I would say sort of the sub-thesis of a good portion of the chapters was this quote about America was created so that not that you could do what you want, but what to do as you ought. I mean, I botched that, but that's the generality of it. And this concept that there's an ought out there, there's an ought out there ingrained in every human being. I mean, you talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah. That's a great quote. There's probably so many more too. That's what is frustrating about a book like this. You probably double the size of it. And just add more and more concepts like that. But yeah, not the freedom to do what you like, but to do what you ought. It's a really deep concept. And like you said, the fact that there even is an ought, and this sort of sense of purpose and sense of duty. And in the context of civics and politics, this sense of being the responsible citizen. And now you can apply this to all sorts of cases, to the smallest thing, and I try to build it from the smallest examples to the biggest examples, but in a small way, it's I think I used the example of just putting your shopping cart back when you're done with it. You know, me and Joe Rogan had a funny conversation about that. He was like, I hate it when people don't do that, and then it was this funny Instagram. Account called Cartnarks. Okay. And they literally take a camera into parking lots, and they follow people who don't put their shopping carts back. And then, so we got all these funny, after that episode of Joe Rogan, we got all these really funny comments like, Joe Rogan and Dan Crenshaw are the Cartnarks. I was like, I'm not, but I would be. That would be fun. It's very frustrating, you know, and it's just the little things, and we've all done it. We've all, you know, cut that corner, I think. And the thing is that the reason you should feel shame about it, and I have a whole chapter on how to feel shame, which again gets into the religion. And it was kind of after the fact that I added so much religion into it, because it's like, wait a second, there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. Yeah. This stuff is taught. That's right. And you know, if I was a better theologian, again, I would have added more. Because there's a lot to it. There's so much that is applicable. But you need to feel bad when you're not living with that sense of duty, and you're not doing the right thing that you ought to do. And then the next question is, well, how do you know what you ought to do? And that's where that moral framework comes into place. You need that anchor in society. It's really important. And even if you're not a Christian, you generally have to admit that your morality does come from a Judeo-Christian framework, because you live in a Western civilization, and it's just where it comes from. Yeah. And like, I'm perfectly fine with an atheist, saying, look, I'm a good person. You can't tell me I'm not a good person. And I'm like, well, there's no indication that you're not a good person. I bet you are. Maybe you're a better person than me.
Yeah.
But you do have to admit that you got that moral framework from somewhere. Really interesting debates between like Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson on this. Sure. They can speak to it much more fluently than I can, but that's where the concept comes from.
Yeah, yeah. So there's C.S. Lewis. I think is probably one of the foremost authorities on narrating this and trying to explain the concept of moral laws and the great oughts of life. And he, a lot of people say, well, what's the moral law? I don't believe in a moral law. Well, he would say that it's ingrained with us, just like the natural law, the law of gravity is ingrained in objects. And he said that, I'll use a warfighter example here. Let's say you're out on a mission, you're under gunfire, your buddy gets hit, he's still in the open, you take cover. You've got two thoughts that are immediately in your mind. It's in every human being's mind. Number one is self-preservation, to stay there, stay safe. I don't want to be a vegetable. Number two, to go out there and save your buddy. And so you've got these two instincts there. Now, the liberal would say that's your law. That's kind of your self-truth. Whatever you decide is kind of what's the best thing to do. But Lewis would say that there's something above that that tells you which one is good and which one's bad, and that's the moral law. And there's a great apologist that recently passed away that said that he's never seen a law without a lawgiver, and so that gives you the personhood that's attached to the moral law, and that gives you, like you talked about, kind of that foundation that the liberals reject as a matter of reasoning, and that's why their ideology is so distracted. It's not coherent. It's not logical. But I think what you brought up in your book, you said that you said, first of all, you said that the Ten Commandments aren't just right, but they're true. And you use that comment similar to that, that they're grounded in ultimate realities is sort of what you were getting at there. Yeah. Do you believe that a right way of thinking has to be grounded in not only the Judeo-Christian ethic, but also in kind of the ultimate reality that this is a universe that God is in control, that this is he's the author of what's happening?
Yeah, and it's hard to. I come at religion very philosophically.
Yeah.
And so as I think through creation and also what's more likely,
yeah.
I find it hard to believe. Not that I don't believe in evolution. I think that's clear in the science, but I tend to think something had to design that, and there's some interesting analysis from a scientific perspective too. Yes. That would demonstrate that mathematically it's really hard to get to us from a single cell organism. Now, adaptation is one thing. It's easy to see how cells adapt and how DNA adapts.
Interspecies adaptation.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more difficult to see how you get from this to this to us from a single cell organism. Just intuitively speaking, look, I've talked to Brett Weinstein and evolutionary biology. I've asked that same question to evolutionary biologists, very smart people, and they're like, yes, there is. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I can't argue with them. I don't know the science necessarily, but I just don't see it. But so that's just creation. But then there's a next question of why. Why is anything the way it is? And science describes things very well. And I don't see any conflict between science and religion. I've yet to see any conflict.
Yeah, the only difference is science is too small to contain religion. Religion is big enough to contain science, mathematics, the humanities, and all of history. That's the difference.
I think so. Yeah, and morality.
And morality.
I think that's where science has. You can argue anthropologically speaking that, look, we learn our morality, and this would be Sam Harris's argument. I wouldn't want to, I'm kind of butchering it, but he would argue that, look, over time we adapt and we learn behaviors that have a superior outcome, and that's what creates a moral framework. Yeah, maybe that's probably true, but I'm not so sure I see any difference between that and the spiritual side of it. They kind of seem like the same thing to me. It's like you're learning to be closer to God. That's sort of the purpose of religion is to be closer to God and to be closer to that truth. what's the difference between that and what he's saying? I'm not so sure there is one. So it kind of seems to me like we're all just saying the same thing. Science describes things very well. It doesn't explain anything. Because look, and this gets to the philosophy of the unmovable mover.
Yes.
You know, because like I can explain how this cell works and this does this and this does this, but it's like, why? It's like the 5-year-old who's asking, well, why? You know, and you keep asking why, and eventually the mom is like, it just is, okay? Like, because you run out of explanations. Well, why do I have to go in the car? Because you have to go in the car to go to school. Why do I have to go to school? Well, because you have to learn things. Why do I have to learn anything? Because that's how you grow up. It's just, you know? And so you can do the same thing with just explanation of everything. Sure. And science describes that we're constantly searching for that description of processes in physics and biology and thermodynamics and all of it. But there's always going to be the next question as to why. And it literally always, I don't think it's impossible not to keep going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the unmovable mover, that's the unmovable mover is referencing like a cause-effect philosophy.
Yeah.
So I come to God very philosophically.
Yeah.
And that's I don't know. I just do. Yeah. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the founders were theists and not necessarily Christians, and they came to it very philosophically as well. I think you mentioned the kind of the cause and effect, and I think that's really the logical inconsistencies that a lot of the very smart liberals come at, especially the atheists, is because they push it back to evolution. They want to put something. They want to make evolution bigger than what it is. Or the Big Bang, so the Big Bang started it. Well, what was before the Big Bang? Because there's a cause and effect, right? The Big Bang was an effect. It wasn't, it happened at one time. Well, there was some sort of primordial type of, law of gravity or something in place there.
They'll just say science hasn't found it out yet.
Yeah, that's what they say. But they keep moving the why question back, and what they forget is, in Latin, it's called ex nihilo nihil. Out of nothing, nothing comes. I mean, so if there was really nothing, nothing would come out of it. So who created? You're just pushing the question back.
And even if you do explain, okay, fine, maybe we do explain what caused the Big Bang. Well, what caused that?
Yeah.
Again, there's exactly.
Yeah. I've never been walking in the forest or in the middle of nowhere and looked down and saw a watch and thought it's impossible for a watchmaker to exist. and I look at my kids and I look how sharp they are. They're far more complicated and complex than a watch.
Right.
But yet there's no watchmaker.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's crazy.
A good way to put it.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of the Stoic philosophy of not getting over emotional. And you alluded to a little bit earlier about not letting your emotions take control, not being too excited about things because, and I can't remember if it was Aristotle or someone around 300 BC that kind of Epicurus maybe that started this off. But talk a little bit about kind of your Stoic philosophy, because you allude to a lot of it to in your book.
Yeah, no, I reference it a lot. Look, I don't want to start with. It's not like I was a big reader on Stoicism prior to that. Again, I established concepts in my book, and then I did research after the fact to basically support it. Yeah. And what I would find is like these are just eternal truths, and so it was super easy to research it and back it up. And so I came upon, not like I'd never heard of Stoicism. Obviously, I had. I just did some extra research to add it to the book, but. Marcus Aurelius was I?
That's right. It was Marcus Aurelius.
I don't know if he was the founder.
Again,
I'm not a scholar on Stoicism, but the base. There's a lot of interesting points in there that I think are just very applicable to just being better off in life.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends on which chapter I'm applying it to. But there's a couple things. Look, like for instance, challenge yourself, do hard things. One chapter is called "Do Something Hard."
Yes.
And that is part of the Stoic philosophy. They would encourage, or one Stoic philosopher would place himself in poverty every so often, just to remind himself what it's like. It's not such a shock to the senses to live without power and food or water if you do it every once in a while, right? So when it happens, it wasn't so bad. This gets to a sense of perspective too. I mean, that's a whole other chapter in the book is, and one reason you might do hard things is to grant yourself a sense of perspective. And even if you've never had it hard, or you've never experienced a hard thing, get out of your own head and imagine being in a harder place. And that's helpful psychologically to you. Imagine your ancestors. They're not even that far away. They had it harder than you, like whether you like it or not. And that's an important part of it too. But on the emotional thing, Stoics talked about passions.
Yes, right.
And and they defined passions as sort of this kind of irrational exuberance of emotion. Not so much like I have a passion for, you know, a work or something. That's not what they meant. They meant the just not letting your emotions get the best of you. This isn't a complicated concept, of course, and it's something that like most people would agree with. Like, yeah, I shouldn't let my emotions get the best of me, but you do all the time.
That's right.
So, and so do I, right? I'm just, you know, I make sure I don't do it publicly, but we all do it, and we could all be better. And look, I didn't write this book because I live up to all of these concepts. That's not at all the case. But I mean, look, if you were a perfect human being, you wouldn't need to go to church either. I mean, you still should. Yeah. But you know, the point is that you have a set of standards that you're trying to apply, and that's what it is. Yeah. And you know, to control your emotions takes a highly conscious effort at all times. Yeah. And the first step is just acknowledging that you need to do it. I think. That's right. And being able to have the self-awareness to identify when you're doing it wrong. And a big problem with politics these days, and social media is a big part of this because it allows us to express our emotions like crazy people and get away with it and put it on a platform. That explains that situation I told you about earlier, where I have a grown man who is clearly, again, happy to see me in some event. I'm going to an event right after this. I guarantee I'll have somebody do it again. I like to, yeah, I talk, do you see what I wrote online? And they're almost like giddy about it, or I think they're a little embarrassed about it, you know, and you should be embarrassed. Yeah. Because you sounded crazy, you know, and you were mean. Yes. And emotional. And you weren't thinking, and it's now public. And you just have to stop. Yeah. Doing that, and social media has allowed our worst passionate selves to really take over the conversation. It's not a great thing. Yeah. So in politics, for the viewers, politics, there's a thing called a body man, and I don't know if you use the same terminology there, but it's the guy that's standing there with kind of the candidate or the politician to get him out of conversations he wants to get out of pretty quickly. And that's a very, very important role. Yeah. Very, very important role for things like that. That's true. So you made a comment a second ago about no one's perfect. You made I think the exact quote in your book was that if left to our own devices, we're going to tend to make the wrong choices, the mistakes. Alluding there's some sort of either defect in our morality or defect in our thought. Maybe we're doing the right things, but also for the wrong purpose. Maybe there's wrong intent there, and there's a lot of implications there for being a democracy, being a republic, having the type of governmental system that we have, in not having too much power concentrated in one place, because people. This is the theological term of this is original sin. That once Adam sinned in the garden, that sin cascaded down through humanity, and it's called original sin by a federal's head there, and it's kind of what Christ came to do, to kind of alleviate that, and we can get into that later if we need to. But talk about that. I mean, do you perceive that whenever you're coming into an interaction that there may be wrong intent, like the default is the ill intent, or when you see a bill coming from the side, is there ill intent on that, or is there like what's the assumption? What's kind of the standard default in Dan Crenshaw's mind when you're interacting with someone from the opposite side? Yeah, and I don't want to give the impression that I think if left to our own devices, humanity would just go down these dark paths. It certainly does sometimes. The point I was probably that you're probably referring to in the book was the conservative ideal that and again, the constrained vision that the purpose of government is to basically create a simple set of rules for a complex society and an incentive structure that generally, in the aggregate, gets to the best outcomes. You know, the progressive side is, no, we're always looking for the perfect outcome, and we will continue to tinker with it at every level. And then the simpler question of like, yeah, what do these people think? Do they have bad intent? I mean, they certainly don't think so. Yeah. And if they don't believe that it's bad intent, like they're not evil geniuses, but they, you know, because, geez. And sometimes I struggle to like, I'm like, God, maybe they do. But to have truly bad intent, I think you have to know that you're wrong, like it's evil, but you're going to do it anyway because there's some personal gain for that. You know, so like a crime boss would be a good example of that.
Sure.
Like I know I'm hurting people, but I make a lot of money off of it. So that's one kind of moral case. With policy, it's like, okay, well, let's think of it this way. Like, why does every policy action the Democrats take increase illegal immigration? Okay, so is their intent bad? Well, they wouldn't say so because they don't think it's bad to allow more people to come across the border illegally. They think it's compassionate. Because
good is relative to them, yes.
Yeah, and well, I guess to everybody, really. Yeah. So they just don't value certain things like sovereignty, rule of law, any kind of adherence to a process of immigration. They just don't value these things, and they also and they diminish the costs as well. And so, you know, I think they're very myopic in their assessments of policy and the good outcomes that come with it. And so that's how they view that. Now, I definitely think it's bad, but as far as, you know, ill intent, it's a different question and harder to say. I do think they're power hungry, right? Like I noted conservatives are paranoid. They're power hungry. That's the left. That's the two P's for each side. And we're always paranoid somebody's coming after us, somebody's watching us, that our own side has betrayed us, right? And it's like always, it's paranoia to an exceptional degree, but they are power hungry to an exceptional degree. Yeah. And is that bad intent? Yeah. Now you're getting closer to what I think is ill intent, but again, they think they're gaining power to help you. So like they don't, you know, so it's, maybe I'm nitpicking the question too much, but it's, you know, I'm trying to be thoughtful about it. But they definitely want more power, which I think is bad.
So Brett Weinstein, Weinstein, you brought up a second ago, I think he used the comment, maybe it was in your podcast with him or Joe Rogan's podcast recently, or Jordan Peterson's maybe, where he said that once you let the minority dictate the agenda, that you, quote unquote, uninvent America.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it sounds like something he would say, and you know, he's certainly referring to the very radical left, and especially with things like the transgender movement, you know, and that's a minority of a minority driving that.
Yes.
I had a transgender person on my podcast not too long ago, and she is now a he, and he was like, look, like 80% of us just are not even close to believing this craziness. You know, as far as trying to impose beliefs on others, and that's really where it gets out of whack, and that's what Brett's, you know, referring to. Our system is designed to protect the natural rights of the minority, but not create a system based on minority preferences. That would be, or majority preferences for that matter. Yeah. You know, it's you can't do that, and that's it's more of a cultural movement on the left, right? Their agenda, which in theory could be implemented in a democratic way by a majority, but that agenda is certainly driven by a minority, and I don't think that has good long-term. It doesn't have long-term sustainability, in my opinion. So we should be a little bit more optimistic about our hopes for the future, because like people are getting turned off by the craziness. Yeah, I think minorities are the first ones to start shitting as we've gained more and more traction in the Latino population and gained a tiny bit of traction in the black population because they're a little bit sick of being tokened and talked down to. And I think if we just speak to them, and we don't have to change anything we're saying. Conservatives in the past have long just walked on eggshells around minorities. They're like, what do we say? Just tell them the truth. Say, look, I'm not going to see you any differently. I'm not going to promise you anything. And like these are the principles I stand on. They might work for you, they might not. Yeah. But at least that's what it is. Yeah. And we're not going to lie to you. That's right. I think that's a pretty good selling point, to be honest.
Definitely, definitely. So many places to go there. So I think it was Nicholas Nassim Taleb in his book Fragility, maybe in Black Swan. He pointed out that once you get to a place in society where 3 to 4% of the minority of the total population are acting as a minority and they're dictating to the majority, that's when societies begin unraveling. And I think it was exactly to what you were saying a second ago. And even, we talked about that this may not be a longevity type of path that the liberals are trying to execute. You look at G.K. Chesterton, he was writing in the 1920s about, he didn't call it wokeism, but that's essentially what it was, that these people are just, they have no morals, they're not attached to reality, they're not attached to the truth, and it's kind of a moving target there.
Yeah, it's kind of what postmodernism is. If you're going to define it, I don't know that I have a great definition of it, but it's sort of a departure from traditional truth on purposefully so. It's purposely confusing. And there's a interesting little thought experiment you can do to understand how that tiny little minority vastly changes society really quickly. And so, like, if your daughter's a vegan, for instance, and this is the tyranny of the minority, and it's easier for you and your wife to just cook vegan meals from now on, because otherwise you're cooking 2 meals. Yeah. And then, okay, so now you guys are all vegan, just out of just practicality, but now you have a dinner party, and then maybe a dinner party at somebody else's house, and you're like, hey, like, we we have to have a vegan, and they're like, okay, we'll just make it all vegan, and then now everybody's eating vegan. That's sort of how it happens. That it seems harmless, but it's not. And where it gets tricky is, in this particular thought experiment example, where it gets tricky is, well, I'm also going to tell guests not to bring other food because I don't want that to emotionally harm the vegan. And that's sort of, now you're getting into a place where you're infringing on people's rights in a very direct way. Yeah. And look, as conservatives, especially religious conservatives, that's the proper balance of the live and let live philosophy. And look, we will certainly proselytize to people on the right way to be, but we will never force it. Right. There's a huge difference. And liberals really don't get this difference about, look, there's a big difference between talking about it and even in a strong way, and also protecting certain institutions that have that set of rules. Big difference between that and creating a legal standard that makes you do something. Big difference, and also infringes on your right to associate with who you want to associate with. I don't understand why they can't get this. It's because I think the compromise with the LGBT community is probably pretty easy, and I think most LGBT people would agree with that. Yeah. And but that small minority is much more militant about it, and they're not okay with a live and let live philosophy. They want a you will accept me into your space philosophy. Yes. Maybe that's a locker room. Maybe it's a religious organization. Maybe it's a place of work. And these are difficult questions. I mean, we were all a little disappointed with Gorsuch's decision on this one, but I can't remember what the Supreme Court decision was called. But it was regarding a funeral parlor where a man transitioned to a woman, and so now you have this case, and this was a man a minute ago, and now it's a woman, and you work at a funeral home, which is a sensitive place. Sure. It's kind of different if it's an office, or fine. Like, again, I wouldn't care personally. Just okay, fine, just get back to work is kind of what I would say. But it's a funeral home, and you're going to be dressing differently. And the way I point out to people, why is this different? And why is this different than say, discrimination on race or gender and other immutable characteristics? And the reason it's different, and I think we should look at this in the legal sense differently, is because you're changing a behavior. That's where the line is. You're changing a behavior, and I'm not sure what's wrong with an employer saying, you vastly changed your behaviors. These are not immutable characteristics anymore. So I have a right to not associate with you anymore. Mm-hmm. So again, there's a framework for rights that works okay. Yeah. And we should probably go to that. Yeah,
yeah. So just to know, I think the one potentially I guess confrontational item in your book is probably something no one's ever pointed out to you or maybe have asked you about. You have a brief excerpt in there about Bradley Manning converting to Chelsea Manning. Yeah, yeah. And you changed the pronoun in there. Uh-huh. The reason I bring it up is because you brought up the transgenders. Why would you change the pronoun there in a written book? I can see you change the pronoun if you're addressing the person directly in the room.
Oh, same reason, out of politeness.
Okay.
Like if you asked me to, like the transgender, so I call him a transgender man, the guy who was on my podcast. It's not a guy, it's a biological woman. Okay. I still call him a guy, because that's what he asked for. Yeah. It's purely out of politeness. I'm under no obligation to believe that you're and he would say the same thing. He would be like, no, I'm not going to make you believe that I'm a biological man. That's normal. That's a normal a normal person transgenderism. Okay, but yeah, it's just out of politeness. You know, like I'm not gonna try, because the goal is not to trigger people here. The goal is to educate and frankly, if I had like intentionally, quote unquote, misgendered him, or her. So anyway, you see, like it's hard.
That's right.
But like, I'm not intentionally doing it, and if I had intentionally done it, then it would have taken away from the broader argument I was making. And the broader argument, I think, in that case was more just about elevating wokeism above, in that case, what would have been academic, I guess. What's the word I'm looking for? I lost my train of thought. But it wasn't academic qualification, right? Okay. Chelsea Manning was just not qualified to be there, but they were so obsessed with the woke that they wanted him to be, or her to be there, whatever this is. Now I'm super confused. But anyway, that was the main point. So that, I think you should. Like, if somebody asked you to call them Sally and they were Sam yesterday, just call them Sally. Who cares? Yeah, I just don't care.
You want to keep the conversation going. Yeah. You don't want to cut things off. There's no reason to do that.
But as soon as Sally says, well, you have to believe that I'm a woman now. And it's like, well, I don't have to believe. Or this is where it gets really bad, and gets into the Equality Act. Not only do you have to believe that, but if you're a doctor, you have to treat me as if I'm a woman. And it's like, no. Yeah. Now we're being silly. And this is where it gets really bad. Okay, there's another problem with the Equality Act. And by the way, not just the Equality Act, but we just voted on the Violence Against Women's Act, which is a really long-standing bipartisan thing that we're against violence against women. That we're not for violence against women. Yes. But the Democrats and what they like to do. So what they did is they made sure that there was a new provision in the, because we're just reauthorizing a program, but they added to it that biological men could be in women's shelters. This is really bad stuff, and like it's really easy to find examples of bad things happening when you allow this stuff to happen. My wife's aunt is a cop, and like she just, so I don't have to look hard for this stuff, right? Yeah. Like, this was a month ago in Maryland. 2 women were beaten badly by a biological man claiming to be a woman in a women's shelter. Like, so we're not making this isn't theoretical. Like, this stuff happens. You can't put biological men in a women's shelter, a women's prison, a women's locker room, women's sports. You just can't do it. Let's stop pretending that we can do that.
That's right. That's right.
It's just really ridiculous.
And therein is a perfect example where ultimate reality, ultimate truth, and common sense detach from one another. They're no longer even in the same room. I mean, it's just insane. So you brought up the subject a second ago about shame. You mentioned shame in one of your comments. Shame has, you know, an inextricable attachment, I think, to the idea of repentance, of asking for forgiveness, saying you're sorry, that sort of thing. And the irony, Dan, that I have in the whole progressive movement is that if you think of the term progressive, you're progressing towards something better. Now, there's nothing that's ultimately better in the progressive's mind, which is logical fallacy number one in the term progressive. But if you're headed in the wrong direction down a road, the shortest way back is to turn around and go back the right way, right? And the person who turns around first is the most right by definition. And the progressives don't understand that. And in this, and I think maybe it was your article, Daily Wire, where there's a general lack of shame in society for certain things. They're afraid to turn back and go back the right direction. They're afraid to admit that they were wrong. They were afraid to repent for the things that they've done. Is it just me, or do you see kind of a general lack of willingness to repent or acknowledge wrongdoing or wrong motive or wrong philosophy in half of America?
Yeah, well, it's not just progressives, right? It's a political problem. The problem with progressives, as you mentioned it, is a correct one. They don't define their utopia very well.
Yeah.
Like, you know, a question I always ask is like, okay, if the rich aren't paying their fair share, what is the fair share? At least tell me.
Yeah.
So that we, you know, I know where you're going with this, but by design they don't, because progressivism, right? It's always a struggle towards utopia, which means no place in Greek. Right. So that is the goal. Now I think that's a little different than what my conversation about shame. I do agree it's necessary to even repent. You have nothing to repent for if you don't feel bad about it in the first place. That's the whole point. And the problem with modern society, to a large extent, is being proud not to feel bad about things. Yeah. And so I actually don't see this as a particular problem on the left. It's a particular problem in America, writ large, frankly. And you know, I talk about the performative politics going on the right, and there's almost a contest to like say the most outlandish thing and be, you know, the hardest hitting, and then be unapologetic for it, just for the sake of sort of triggering the libs. And like, that's not productive either. And that kind of gets to my problems, my conversation about shame as well. But on a really basic level, look, just feel bad when you do something wrong. And because that's the only way that you can live with a sense of duty. You can't figure out how to, you know, turn around the right direction if you don't know in the first place that you're even going the wrong direction. Right. And that gets into, you know, we already talked about this at length, but, you know, having a moral standard and framework to go off of in the first place. But look, just feel bad about it. And, you know, I brought up a bunch of different political examples in the book. And what I noted, though, in the book is this kind of inverse and so the politicians who refuse to apologize are operating off of incentives that the public delivers to them. So it's everybody's fault, right? It's not that we just have these evil reptilian politicians. Yeah. They're operating off of incentives, and we got to be a little bit more mindful of that as Americans. Like, we're screwing it up also, just as a culture. And people don't like to hear that because it's hard to take action off of that fact, right? Yeah. Because maybe you are perfect, but there's a lot of people who aren't. But I'm just saying we need to acknowledge it. And once you acknowledge that, it's a little bit easier to understand politicians and public figures, and maybe give them some benefit of the doubt. Yeah. You know, because the incentive structure is designed where there is no repentance. There's no forgiveness. Because
you get canceled. Yeah. It's cancel culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the politician in these situations, you either over apologize, like you over repent.
Like you fly home from Cancun the next day.
And that's actually why you brought up, when I was bringing up Saved by the Bell, it was in the context of Mario Lopez, who over repented.
Yes.
He said something perfectly reasonable and then he repented for it. It's like, you don't need to repent, man. You just be like, look, you can explain yourself if you want, I suppose. And then there's the people who are like, well, I just see no way out of this, so I'm never going to apologize for anything.
Yeah.
Now, Donald Trump's a great example of that. Literally has never apologized for anything in his entire life.
And it's worked well for him comparatively.
I mean, amazingly, yeah. You know, sort of. Like, he was impeached twice. You know, and he probably wouldn't have been if he'd been more apologetic about it, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
And he's a little different. Like he's a political.
Yeah, you stack the probabilities of becoming a billionaire, having a real estate success, being a reality TV show, and then being president. I mean, it's unfathomable probability.
And a lot of people are trying to copy that, and that's sort of what Trump. If you want to know what Trumpism is, people are like, "What is Trumpism?" I'm like, "There's no policy platform. The policy platform has always just been conservatism. He did a good job implementing conservative policies for the most part." So there isn't like this unique Trumpism, but what Trumpism is that sort of unapologetic behavior.
Yeah.
And that kind of screw you, there is no political correctness kind of behavior, which has just fired up a lot of conservatives. But you can take it too far, and it doesn't work for everybody else.
Yes.
It worked for Trump quite well. It doesn't work for well, it didn't work that well because he lost the second term. So people need to kind of take a step back sometimes and balance it out a little bit. So that's the unapologetic side, and you got to find the middle. And I gave some examples of people who did find the middle pretty well. JK Rowling is a good example. She kind of refused to be canceled for her extremely normal and sane comments on transgenderism, and she's a super liberal. She agrees with me on nothing. Ellen DeGeneres was another example. I try to use a lot of these type of people. By types of people, I mean liberals.
You mean sit next to George Bush, right?
They tried to cancel her, and she didn't apologize. No, she explained it. She was like, "Look, I mean," but she didn't bow down. Yeah. That's a really good example of like kind of the middle ground of how to handle a controversy. And you know, the good news is I think they're generally rewarded for it. I don't know if J.K. Rowling has really been rewarded for it, but she should be. And that's at least we should know what the right path looks like.
Yeah. So just kind of stepping back, it seems like your whole ethos is centered around responsibility and accountability. I mean, that's the whole SEAL narrative. I think that's the whole responsibility. That's the whole victor versus victimhood type of thing. And you know, we had a conversation about morality, and I think there's a very, very close tie-in here. I think it was it Tozer maybe, that talked about morality essentially has three components to it. One is responsibility or duty to your neighbor, a responsibility to oneself, like inwardly, and a responsibility to God. And it seems like Dan Crenshaw's writings, kind of the content you're putting out, is talking about the inverse of what the liberals are putting out. The narrative around the liberals is victimhood and a duty and responsibility to your neighbor. Like you should give up your rights in order to be responsible for your neighbor. Now we're going to dictate the hierarchy by which that's executed. Yeah. But the Crenshaw's narrative is the flip. The liberals would refer, obviously, they ignore the responsibility to God. They ignore the responsibility to oneself because everything's relative and there's no God to be responsible to through oneself. But I mean, in your book, you set out very, very clearly that your responsibility and accountability to oneself, no plan B, and then obviously you laid out the eschatological argument. Your duty to God is that which it cascades down to the other responsibilities, it seems like.
Yeah, that seems about right. And you know, I think that's based in a traditionalism. And personal responsibility is a big bedrock for conservatives. We say it a lot. We don't explain it very much. And there's a practical reason why that's true. Well, there's a spiritual, let's maybe focus on the spiritual reason first. It's empowerment. If you're not personally responsible, you're disempowered.
That's right. So
if you're hyper accountable, the way like Jocko talks about, everything is in your control all of a sudden. And it's a mindset. I'm not saying it's practically true. Of course, not everything's in your control, literally. But the belief that it is, and the belief that at least you can recover from trauma or victimhood, and be better and stronger for it, that's a mindset. And the liberals get really wrapped up with that point. Like they're like, well, are we supposed to just not fight injustice?
That's right.
No, I'm not saying that. Like they just always put words in my mouth on that one. And like you can explain, they just don't get it. Yes. They don't understand this philosophy of overcoming your victimhood. They believe that that's mutually exclusive with addressing the victimized people, but it's not. You can do both. It's very frustrating. Their sense of morality, in my estimation, is we had to explain it and why it's different from what you just laid out. Is the collective morality, collectivism in general, and where that really gets dangerous is what they've started to do recently is collective guilt and collective punishment as well. And this gets into, I mean, geez, Senator Tammy Duckworth, I just gave her some hell on social media because she's like, well, I'm just not going to vote anybody that's not a diversity candidate, so no white people. And I'm like, that's racist. You're a racist for saying this. You know, like we figured this out, guys. Western civilization figured this out, how not to do racist stuff. We bled for it. We fought like really hard to get to this point where individual content of your character matters, and you people are just trying to reverse it. It's really dangerous
and
stuff.
you're sexist for calling her out for that.
Yeah, or anti-veteran or something. And yeah, it's so stupid.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the controllable versus uncontrollable. I think you alluded to you specifically stated Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, the Stockdale paradox, where he was parachuting in, his plane got hit, he parachutes down, and he knows in the back of his mind there's going to be 5 years minimum down there. And the way he took control is he looked at what are the controllable factors, what are the uncontrollable factors, and he concentrated on what's controllable right now. And I mean, I think you tie that in very, very well to this victimhood narrative, that there's certain things that we can control, whether it's making our bed or washing the dishes or making sure I get to work on time. There's things we can control in our lives, and that's the best place to start.
Yeah, and it's empowering.
Yeah.
It's empowering. And I forget the exact point I was making it. Like he calls it the paradox, and I was kind of making the point that it wasn't necessarily a paradox, but we've been talking for a while, and I can't even remember the point I was making in the book. But yeah, look, but the broader point and the simpler point is acknowledge what you can control, and also maybe expand the things, to expand that list of control items. And acknowledge that you might have more control over a lot of things than you previously thought, to include other people and how you interact with them. Yes. And it's helpful to swallow your pride sometimes, take a step back and think, you know, maybe I am at fault for that really mean person. Like, what could I have done differently? Now that's really hard for me to do. Okay, like again, I am not saying I live up to this, but if you did do this, you would excel, I bet. Because look, interactions are not just some evil person versus you. All right, now that's how a lot of us interpret those interactions, because we don't want to be wrong. We want to believe that the other person either infringed on us or exerted their power over us in some way. We really want to believe this stuff, and I think we're all guilty of it. You know, I certainly look for reasons to believe that the reason that interaction didn't go well is because of them and not because of me. But it's healthy to maybe take some blame, and what I tend to do is I will take the blame, but I'll be like, yeah, but I'm still going to do it anyway. You know, fine, but at least acknowledge it. You know, it'll help you be better. Yeah. And like this, because this is all about self-growth. Again, that's what the book is about. So acknowledging you have that power and that it's your fault when things happen, even if it's objectively not, right? So this is, again, it's a mindset. You're going to be better off in life. Well,
I think it's okay to agree to disagree on certain things. I think. I'll never forget, on evening of January 5th, you called me, and we had a conversation about what was going to happen on January 6th. We don't need to get into all that there, but I can tell you we were probably on different sides of that, and you took a lot of heat for that. I think a lot of that heat is dissipated, I believe. But you stood your ground, you stood up for what you believed, and you made, in your opinion, what the right choice was according to the Constitution and according to your oath. Yeah. And it's okay. You know, we're not going to get it along 100% of the time. 80%, 80-20. That's pretty good. Yeah.
I would say so. I mean, my only regret about that is probably not being more outspoken about it earlier. I don't think I could have prevented what happened on January 6th, but it was I was mostly in the private debate of what we should do about, this is about voting to certify the election or not, which again, my whole point is we have no power to certify the election. It's not even in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Nowhere does it say the word certify. Anyway, I have a whole podcast about that.
The Chip Roy podcast, that was excellent. Yeah. And Trey Rowdy, maybe?
Yeah, Trey on it, and Chip Roy, another professor of law, and that's by far my most downloaded podcast, like in history of all my podcasts. And so, people were interested in that subject, and because it was confusing, and it got manipulated in the press, or it got manipulated in the public discourse by our side. I'm still very upset about it with a lot of my colleagues.
Yeah.
that have made it known.
Well, going back to the primary topic about getting floor time to speak, I assume some of that was just get floor time, get some attention.
Yes. Yeah. From a lot of my colleagues, 100%. And I'm like, well, where did that get you?
Yeah.
Didn't turn out well, to say the least.
One final thing before we let you go, I want to ask you a question. I've never heard you answer this. I don't even know if you're comfortable answering this, but I want to hear about maybe the first time that you killed someone.
Well, I've never really killed somebody like in a face-to-face.
Okay.
It's more indirect means.
Okay.
And they're probably dead, like kind of thing.
Okay.
But if I had that story, I would tell it. I really wouldn't.
But
care.
kind of the after effects, kind of the emotional after.
Yeah.
Was there any impact afterwards?
No.
Okay.
No. I'm not saying there couldn't be. It probably depends on how that interaction occurs. Some guys, everybody will tell you maybe a different story, but we're highly conditioned for it.
Yeah.
And but there's a lot of, like, again, going back to moral frameworks, it's morality in wars, and it's a long conversation, and I haven't really thought about it a whole lot. I just know that we are conditioned to be okay with it to a large extent, but not okay with everything. I mean, there is a lot of ethics involved, I think, in what we do. When guys are really torn up about what happens overseas, it's usually when the situation is really vague.
Yeah.
Or a kid accidentally gets killed, or someone innocent actually accidentally gets killed. That's really terrible. Because nobody wants to do that on purpose. Well, I'm not saying nobody. Obviously, it's happened, but we implement justice if that does happen. Sure, that's not okay. So, no, just as just the nature of our deployments, we're always kind of firing at each other. It's hard to see them. So again, we're hoping they're dead. They don't seem to be moving. They're probably dead.
I guess if you're walking up to shoot someone point blank, you probably committed a war crime.
No, not at all.
Okay.
That happens all the time.
Okay.
It's just I just didn't get to do it.
Okay.
And,
okay.
Yeah. Because there's lots of close quarters stories for sure. Someone comes around a corner and you better shoot them quick.
Yeah.
We clear a lot of houses. It just so happened that every time I do it, they're not fighting back.
Okay.
So
thank God.
Yeah,
man.
But you're never going to execute somebody. But I've certainly, I guess in a sense, ordered the deaths of many with just being like, there's people over there. We need air support. We need to kill them.
Which is the smartest way probably to do it, rather than go in and.
Well, we can't get to them. Maybe like they're kind of firing at us. They're sort of locked in a compound or something. And so the majority of kills overseas are going to be like that.
Okay.
We're taking fire from this. Let's get an AC-130 gunship overhead, or some Kiowas or Apache, whatever air support we happen to have at that moment, and just rain down on them. That's just usually how it works.
Okay.
So
as we wind down, SEALs have their weapons of preference in various cases. So I want to go through some different scenarios, and if you know you're going to walk into one of these scenarios, you know you're going to be in a fight of some sort, just kind of give me your kind of off the cuff weapon of choice. So you're going to a biker bar. What are you carrying in there?
The biker bar.
Biker bar. You know you're going to get in a fight.
I'm definitely going to get into a fight.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's with bikers.
Bikers. Yeah.
Jeez.
These
they
are liberal
armed?
bikers. These are not conservative bikers.
Okay, so they don't have guns on them.
No, but they've got bottles. They've got bottles.
They have bottles.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, wouldn't you, if you know, this is kind of, yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. Yeah, because you don't want to escalate situations either, right? See, it's like you don't want to pull a gun on somebody, but you also, are you outnumbered?
Oh yeah, you're outnumbered. Yeah, yeah.
To a huge extent, then you may want a gun on you.
Yeah.
And just stop the fight right there. You don't want to shoot anybody, but it probably might de-escalate a fight quicker. So that's an interesting way to think about it, I guess. Now, if you're not allowed to have a gun, you know, it's such an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, because I don't carry on me a lot. So, a good self-defense knife is one that you can pull out of your pocket, and that has a hook on it that allows it to be deployed as soon as you pull it. Mm-hmm. There's some companies that make them that way, or you can make your own knife that way. People think switchblades are the way to go. That's not true. That requires an extra step or two.
Okay.
But look, you're just for the audience, the best way out of a fight is to not to start the fight in the first place and just de-escalate. It'll hurt your pride in that moment, but you will be better off generally. And if you do get into it, you better know what you're doing. Don't go to the ground in a bar fight, because then you're just getting kicked by everybody. You know, you need to be able to like strike and move away very fast. Yes. That would be my sort of self-defense 101.
Dan Crenshaw, man of peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's assume you're walking into a large field, and you know you're going to have to do some sniper work. Mm-hmm. You know, the SCAR, maybe one of the traditional types of sniper weapon, maybe the 308, something like that. What's your weapon of choice, or what was your weapon of choice for kind of long range reach out and touch someone?
Well, I only had a SCAR heavy 7.62. I'm not like a big gun guy in the sense that like I have all these different types of guns. I just have what was issued to me and just what works. Okay. And I wasn't a sniper, so I never got to have a sniper rifle. Okay. There's going to be maybe 3 or 4 guys qualified as snipers in a platoon. They go to a 3-month sniper school, and they're the only ones with sniper rifles.
You're about 308s or 50 cals? Or?
All of them. So they'll have all of, they'll have 308, a 50 cal. There'll even be a 5.56 version as well. So, you know, different, in a lot of it, you know, the 300 Win Mags, everybody's favorite probably. Mm-hmm. It's most diverse, because the 50 cals it's huge. Yeah. It's useful it depends. It depends on the situation. 300 Win Mag's probably pretty great for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Home protection, home defense.
Bow and arrow. I don't know. Just 'cause it's fun. I mean, I have, so for me, a pistol, it depends on your home. Yeah. This gets into like the gun debate a little bit. And this is what's important for people. Again, like if it's, for the audience, you can choose to advocate for your Second Amendment rights by strapping on your AR and going to Starbucks and exercising your right. Or you can make an argument, and the argument would be, look, an AR truly is a self-defense weapon, and here's how I know. You know, bring your wife to the range, and have her shoot the pistol versus an AR, and see which one she's more accurate with and feels more empowered with. The AR might be scary at first; it is louder, but also basically has no kick. It's very easy to be accurate with it for any kind of shooter, and that makes it a much better self-defense weapon. You know, a pistol, you will screw it up. I promise you that. Now, again, it's fine for me. I'm pretty good with it, and I know I can hit it. But even in a tense situation in the dark, you know, 30, 40 feet away, which we're in a place that's easily that far. You're not going to hit anything. Yeah. And that's not a good place to be. So that's why an AR actually makes quite a bit of sense for self-defense. But you know, if you're living on a ranch, you should definitely have an AR. And you know, people are like, well, shotgun. That's what Joe Biden thinks, right? Everybody just needs a shotgun, and that's fine. It's a fine home self-defense weapon too. Yeah, yeah. I don't deny that. Yeah.
Matters if you have kids in the other room too.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah. Do you really want the spray? You have to kind of tactically assess your surroundings and see what the best self-defense situation is for that.
I'll never forget, you had an event out at the range one time. You had some SEAL buddies in from California, and so we went out there and they taught us some kind of gun handling tactics, things like that. But I think there was a reporter there, a female reporter there, and they got her on the sniper range. I think it was a 300-yard range, if memory serves, on a 308.
Yeah.
2 or 3 shots, and they had her sighted in. She was hitting bullseye from 300 yards, like it was nothing. I was impressed by their level of care and skill and training, just kind of that quick.
The hard part about being a sniper is knowing how to sight in a rifle perfectly. That's most of the training. There's obviously a great deal of skill and your breathing and how you do that trigger pull, but that can be taught much quicker. Like once a rifle's sighted in, like, I can hit things at 800, 900 yards, just one after another. But that doesn't make me a sniper. Yeah. Okay. Like there's a lot more skill sets to it than people realize.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming in, Dan. I have a gift for you.
All right.
If you want to open that.
Is it under $25 or whatever?
It is definitely under $25. Yes.
Thank you very much.
And so I'll let you. Do you know who's on that shirt?
Oh, please clap. It's funny.
So
poor Jeb.
That's Jeb.
I love
that's
Jeb.
Jeb.
He's a nice guy.
And
He's a nice guy.
And can you tell the people why I got you a Jeb shirt?
I don't know.
Okay, you admit there's 25 debates, 25 forums, whatever it was.
Yeah.
You accidentally told people.
Oh, did I?
One time you did, and I think we teased you for it.
Did you film it? Oh, that would be great.
We'll find it. I'm sure it's on film sometime.
There were good times over there. Remember when I told everybody you were a cat owner? You were a cat guy?
My wife bought a cat 2 months ago, yeah.
So you are a cat guy. Self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's right, that's right. Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming in. Thanks for your friendship and your support for our country. I mean, you're an American hero, and we appreciate everything you've done.
I appreciate you.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.